Hi,
Hello.
hello.
So here we are, a live recording of our initial reaction to the first Labour budget in 14 years. The
You know
budget of
what?
20.
That just being able to see, like before we dive into it, just being able to see an alternative vision felt so refreshing.
Yeah,
Like to actually see the difference between social democracy and conservatism. I was just like, oh right, yeah, it's quite different.
yeah,
and
yeah. I
and I,
thought the exact same thing.
obviously because they tacked quite to the centre to win the election as well. I actually think this has gone a little bit more to the left. Not like we're not talking like Corbyn
No,
style
no,
socialism, but I do think she's given more than I expected. And
I
my sum up of it is I am tentatively happy.
Me too. That's
Yeah.
exactly how I feel as well. I think we all knew that the national insurance piece was going to come for businesses, and that was I've been anxious about that for days, wondering what the impact of that's going to be like for us, knowing full well how hard the economic picture has been for the last 6 years of trying to be an entrepreneur. But actually, I think she handled that really, really well with that statement. Immediately following saying, she's listened to the CBI, she's listened to the IOD, and she's actually going to put some structures in place in order to support. It was not the CBI and the IOD actually; it was the Federation of Small Business. Put some structures in to support small businesses with the increase in that threshold. We'll benefit from that as a business. Most small businesses will benefit from that. So I think it's softened the blow for definite,
I think
which
there
is
was some I think that's almost like the bigger picture. So
good.
investment tax are turned on, kind of restoring public finances and trying to
Yeah,
get, because we all know how much everything is just crumbling. And I think people in the UK are willing to accept higher taxes if they see an improvement in things. But what I do
yeah,
think is interesting, and the main risk of it is putting that on business more, because
mm,
obviously they pledged, hadn't they, no whatever a worker was, and
yeah.
everyone knows what they meant by that. I was like, I don't know why the media are getting
Yeah,
so
no,
wrapped up in what is a
that's
worker.
been such a bollocks debate, hasn't it, over the last couple of weeks? What are working people? What are working people? We all know what the definition
Yeah,
of a working person is. Come on.
yeah.
If you earn the majority of your income from charging rent on additional properties to the one that you live in, that you don't count as a working person. You know you don't. I know you don't. You know you don't. Stop it. It's
And I
silly.
was just like, I don't know why people are all pretending to be thick all of a sudden, as if they
Yeah,
don't know what they
exactly.
mean, exactly what they mean. But I
Yeah,
guess
exactly.
let's go on that employer national insurance, because that's where the majority of the fiscal black hole
Yeah, there's 40,
seems to
40
come from.
billion, 25 billion of the 40 billion that's being raised is coming from that national insurance increase from business. So that is going to be a huge, huge increase for most businesses. But the brunt of it is going to be borne by the more established businesses rather than those in the startup and the really small micro business space, which is the side of it where we are currently in our journey. So, I mean, I'd be interested. I've seen a lot of stuff around on LinkedIn around people saying, they've been anxious about that. Like I said, I was as well. But I'd be interested to see what that does to spending habits of the bigger businesses and hiring habits as well. So, how do you increase um, employment whilst also increasing the cost that businesses are going to pay to have employees?
Yeah, it is interesting because it is a risk. Because one, you potentially stop businesses putting up people's wages, so they've got more money in, just coming in. It could lower kind of corporation tax receipts and all that kind of thing, because there's less profit being made because they're having to pay more of this. But I think if anything, it just shows that none of it's perfect, and you've got to find it from somewhere. And it's like, I think what I've liked about this is I feel like I can now see a bit more of the vision of
Yeah,
what
same.
they're trying to achieve. Like, restore public, like, just get some sensible economics going and restore, like, balance the books, but also try to bring the public realm to a level where hopefully in the longer term, in maybe 5 to 10 years, businesses don't even feel this increase because staff can get to hospital quicker, or they can get to work easier, or
Mm.
they don't have to pay so
Now,
much for other things. So
that's an
that's
interesting
the
one,
thing.
isn't it? Right. So let's talk about like staff can get to work easier, because that's an interesting one, isn't it? In that you've got the levies being held for no increase in petrol at the pump. However, you are seeing bus prices increase. So I thought that was an interesting one in terms of, we try that disproportionately affects your lower paid people, because ultimately outside of London, it is those who are on a lower income that usually use the bus service. But it also means that we're not encouraging people to move away from individual transport. Now, obviously, there was some stuff around electric vehicles, which we can talk about in more depth. But do you think that was the right choice, or do you think that? I mean, Andy Burnham's already said he's capping it in Greater Manchester because they're in control of the bus.
Well, that's again,
in
it's
Manchester.
more of a it's an argument for devolution, because this won't touch London, where transport is capped massively.
Yeah,
And then obviously now Manchester, they've said they're going to keep their £2 bus cap fare, but then they're also introducing like a transport wide, like London, where it doesn't matter if you use the tram or the bus or whatever, it's just a cap depending on what zone. So it's an argument for devolution, but I think that is one of the difficult choices, and it's one of those ones that when you like, the Treasury are probably like, oh, it's only £1 on a bus fare. Like, is it going to
yeah,
be that big of a deal? But it's one of the things that the people who sit and watch the news, or people that are interested in, or are counting the pennies as well. It's one of those things where it does kind of go, oh yeah, that's quite a big deal to me.
Mm.
Yeah, and
Let
the
me just
only
pause
thing
you.
about electric vehicles was just
Let
that.
me pause you there, Declan,
Yeah,
because Poppy's knocking at the window to go out for the toilet. So I'm just going to pause the recording.
don't know
Okay.
where we were. We got disturbed by a dog, didn't we? And now my emails are going off. This is really kind of. But yeah, I think the transport, the wider transport investment stuff was good.
Yeah.
But I think the fuel duty thing, I understand why they do it politically, because we are still a country that drives a lot,
Yeah.
and that would hurt people by taking that fuel duty away and putting those prices up. But yeah, the only thing that was really mentioned about electric vehicles was incentivizing that for companies still, which is great that that's staying. But I was just like, I wonder if I'd have gone a bit further. But I was reading something like, if they didn't have this £3 cap, bus prices would be like crazy expensive if it wasn't subsidised at all. And I was like, well, at
Really?
least they are subsidising it a little bit. But I love the private jet stuff.
Yeah, same. So, and I thought it was funny how she did a little dig as well. I'll be honest. Thought that
So yeah, I was
was well
like,
did.
all right, okay. So you're putting economy prices up a tiny bit, which
Yeah. Which is
aviation's
fine.
still heavily subsidised anyway, by the government. But then putting that 50% increase on duty on private jets, I was like, great, because probably my most left wing kind of attitude is I would ban the hell out of private jets. So I was like, to hear that it's not a step, but it's a signal that it's the super rich that use them, and you
Yeah.
should pay your way. Do you know what I mean? So yeah.
I think that was one of the things that I was hoping they'd do. Speaking of the super rich, I was hoping they'd do a bit more on the redistribution of wealth. I don't think, in my personal entrepreneurial opinion, that enough is being done to tax the super rich. And I say it all the time. I say it every time somebody talks to me about it. But the gap between rich and poor in this country has returned to Victorian levels over the course of the last 14 years. And the only way we redistribute that wealth is to tax the super rich considerably. And even the measures, yeah, like, great that there's some more measures being put in place around inheritance tax, and land tax, and she said, of course, that only affects the sort of one quarter of that audience. Three quarters won't be affected by it, so that's good. But I don't know. I personally would like to see a windfall tax on those with assets over 10 million. I think.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think probably a lot of the front bench would like to see that,
Yeah.
but I don't think it's maybe electorally viable.
How? They're like less than 1% of the bloody
I
country.
know, but they rule the
But
media, they rule a lot of
yeah.
stuff, and I just think as soon as they're wealth tax, it just becomes fodder for but
Yeah,
then
it's interesting, isn't
because
it? How
everyone then thinks, oh, that's going to be me. Like
yeah,
if I become really successful, that'll be me. It's like, no, it probably won't be you
yeah.
because we're not talking.
Not even
You've got
talking.
a
I'm not
million,
even
like,
talking about, like, and I say this all the time. I give it with a disclaimer. I'm not talking about you know, the entrepreneur who's risked it all and has successfully built a business from scratch and sold it for 3 or 4 million in 20 years' time. I'm not talking about taxing those people to the hilt. I'm talking
mm,
about, the assets of the super rich, which is less than 0.01% of the UK population. But I agree with you. I know exactly what you mean. It becomes
and
kind of, and people do buy into this rhetoric of like, but what if that was me one day?
yeah,
I wouldn't want that. Well, it's
and I
not going to
think
be.
the risk as well is these super rich people will move countries. So when you're talking about,
They can move, their assets can't, right? So
well,
it's
yes,
the
but I do
that you
think
can't.
that's a
That's the
risk.
key.
Like
Yeah.
VAT on private schools, I think has been completely blown. I don't think there's going to be the move that people have
No.
said that I might be proven wrong, but we'll see if that happens. But like businesses of our size or medium sizes, when they say, "Oh,
Yeah.
if you put corporation tax, you're going to move out." No, you're not. Like, Kate, you're not going to move your business from the UK to somewhere. Like, we don't have no. The smaller to medium size don't really have that capability to just up sticks
Yeah.
and go, "Oh, I'm going to go somewhere where I can pay less tax." But then, hopefully, as well, if public services are all ticking along nicely again, people then don't mind it. I don't know how this country's got to a point
This
where
is
we want Nordic style levels of public service, but then like an American tax system where you don't pay a lot of tax, like that is not that's not a thing.
yeah.
So yeah.
So you can't have both, can you? That's exactly it. So, I think the windfall tax on oil and gas companies increasing to 38% is a really good one.
Mhm.
Um, in terms of setting the tone. Although I didn't understand what was the like, and I need to research more about that. So there's an increase in the windfall tax on them to 38%, but then there's de- a, a decrease. Let me get it up because I wrote it down and I was like, what does that mean? Du- 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 du.
Yeah, I think when me and you were texting, once it gets to the bit where she's gone through all the forecasts and stuff, and then
Yeah,
it's
you
not
put
just
it
her,
out
but
there.
when it gets to policies, it's like, right, reel them off, reel them off. I
Yeah,
was like, I can't keep up with my notes. I was like,
yeah,
God,
same.
um, yeah,
So the energy profits levy increasing tax rate to 38%. This is
mm,
the windfall tax, but removing 90%, 29% investment allowance, maintaining the 100% first year allowance and the decarbonisation allowance. So I want to know more about what that means.
in my head, it's like you don't get taxed you don't have to pay the windfall tax as much if you are incentivizing decarbonisation. I think that's
Yeah.
where we're at with it. But yeah, that's one thing I was like,
Let's
oh,
leave all
I
that
don't,
phrase. Because it's a bit like the national insurance thing. When she gave the national insurance figure, at the same time as and then talked about, you know, the cap changing. It was like, well, what does that mean for businesses? And I had to do a bit of Googling afterwards. Right, let's have a look what it says here. Today, the government is announcing that the rate of the energy profits levy will increase to 38% from the 1st of November 2024, bringing the headline rate of tax on upstream oil and gas activities to 78%. Fucking hell, that's high, isn't it? It's good though. The period that the levy applies to is also being extended to 31st of March 2030, which is the end of the financial year in which the current parliament is due to finish. So she's doing it until the end of this current parliament then. The Energy Security Investment Mechanism will remain in place, helping to provide operators and their investors with the confidence the levy will no longer apply if prices fall consistently to or below historically normal levels for a sustained period. The government will also remove unjustifiably generous investment allowances from the energy profits levy, including by abolishing the levy's main 29% investment allowance for qualifying expenditure incurred on or after 1st of November 2024. Expenditure incurred prior to making the changes on 1st of November 2024 will not be affected. What does that mean?
yeah, that's a bit too Treasury speak for me. I think I'm
Yeah,
like,
agreed.
what
Like,
does that mean?
I assume people who work in oil and gas know what it means.
Yeah, well, yeah, they will.
Um,
Yeah. They'll be like, how much have I got to pay?
yeah, exactly. 78% is high though, isn't it? I didn't realise that
It
was
is, but isn't
the
it just on the extra? It's on that windfall where
yeah, on
obviously
upstream.
things
Yeah.
have gone up, so you just pay on that extra because it's like they're way higher than they should be due to kind of supply chain shocks and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you
It's
know what my
interesting. Go on.
go on, go on?
No, I was going to say it's interesting. You know, when we had that conversation with the renewable energy client that we work with, I won't mention them here in case I'm not supposed to. But one of the things that they said to us, which I thought was really interesting, was you know, that they were expecting a major windfall tax from the government. This would have obviously been the Tory government a couple of years ago when everybody's prices increased and everybody was making huge profits. And this is in the wind, a windfall tax in like clean energy, and they didn't get it, and they were, you know, they were more than happy to pay it. Be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah,
Out of
maybe
that.
that's what they mean then, in the sense that because obviously the way the grid's set up, and I'm no expert, but it's like a lot of it still goes into the like the overall cost of energy. Like it's like a global market price of certain things, isn't it? So like that it might be that when it says that they're really generous, that is an example of it being really generous because you're still getting more money in because of that artificially high price of energy,
Yeah,
even though you might be generating it from wind or solar. So it's like
yeah,
you should still pay a windfall tax because it's nothing about what you've done. It's the
yeah.
global energy system that has done that. So maybe that's it. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get more from when we speak to clients and partners within the sector on this.
Yeah.
Moving on, my absolute favourite nugget of political just acumen for me was there was a lot of briefing before this that she was going to keep the personal tax thresholds frozen.
Mhm.
And everyone was like, this is ridiculous. Like, inflation's gone up, and now we're starting to see salaries go up. So it's like you end
Yeah.
up paying just creeping into those higher tax bands.
Yeah,
But then
yeah.
I think the Tories have held it, and it's in legislation till 2028. But from 2028, the thresholds will then rise with inflation, which is great news. But what I thought was really clever politics is that'll be just around the time where people are starting thinking about the next election.
Hey.
And I just thought that's a really clever way. You know, like when you always hear, "Oh, they'll
Put
get
more money in people's pockets quickly." Yeah. Right.
A lot of it does boil down to, do I feel better off under this government?
100%. Like, I absolutely have watched this from two perspectives, right? Which is like not even really from a personal perspective, but from a business perspective. Is my business going to be better off? And secondly, are they going to invest some flipping money so that there's some money circulating in the economy? So, because ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, if the government invests with an intention to get a return on that investment, it is more, I think it's better for business. I personally think the thing that has gone wrong over the course of the last 14 years is that there hasn't been any public realm investment, and that has actually seen a huge decrease in business investment too. So I think they both.
It doesn't set a good example, does it? That why on earth should we invest in a country or a business when the country itself doesn't seem confident enough to invest? And obviously, you're going through the investment process at the minute, and we know that, like, not all of these will be completely risk free. Like, 1 billion in aerospace, will that deliver return? It might
And
not.
I want to know how much of that aerospace investment is going on sustainable aviation fluid. Fluid. I keep saying fluid. Fuel.
You do.
I do, don't I? But I want to know how much of that is around, like, because I think there's things that, like, there are pockets of funding that are going into sectors that should be going towards decarbonisation, but isn't being named as decarbonisation funding.
I think that's a good segue, actually, because I noticed quite a lack of, like, I think we've discussed before, like, absolute best thing you could do if the slate was clean is, like, just do a budget where it's like a big industrial green revolution, and that's everything, that fixed everything. But I think it might be a little bit why part of the scope of moving to this Regeneration Earth name that we've changed for our conference, in the sense that it's not necessarily a separate entity now. It's like it's, and I might be giving governments far too much, like, thinking they're a lot better than they are, but a lot of it's in there, like, housing, 5 billion for housing, with however much for that warm homes grant. That's part of a sustainability program,
Yeah.
carbon capture, whilst, some people aren't that, thingy by it and enamored by it and think it isn't provable at scale yet. But again, you've got to try these things, otherwise you never know. But then, there's 11 new green hydrogen projects. So it is in there. It's just not quite, and I don't think she gave much away, and it's probably not her brief, it's probably Ed Miliband, about GB Energy, about what that actually is going to look like. And, I
really want to understand that. That's like, I feel like we're, and they've only been in for just over 100 days or whatever. So we've got to give them a chance to, get everything sorted. But I'm ready to understand more about GB Energy. I'm ready to understand more about, the whole, what's that? That other thing they've announced. I've got it written down. Let me.
I want to know when they're going to have GB Energy staff, so I can be ringing them and saying, "Are you going to come and get involved in our conferences? Like, where are you? Like, when are they coming down the pipeline? Like, that's
exactly. Kind of, how quickly is it going to be? All of that piece. 100%. But it's also like the I can't remember what they're calling it now. I've got it written down somewhere. But the expert bodies that they're creating, in order to, like, investment bodies, when are they going to be ready? What does that look like? How do we? It's like there's this big investment body that's going to support women and getting investment and redistributing investment towards women. So women only get 1% of investment in the UK currently. Like, great, can I have it now? Like, where is it?
I
You
think
know,
this. I think that was it. So I think you've said about that 100, like over 100 days now. But I think what we've got to remember is they were elected. We pretty much went into a short summer recess. They
yeah,
came back for a little bit. Then we went into conference recess. And then I feel like everything in the last month to 6 weeks has just been wait for the budget, wait for the budget, wait
yeah,
for the budget. I almost
1,000%.
feel like this was more revelatory than the King's speech in the sense that that went through some obviously kind of policy priorities, but this kind of goes. This almost felt like right, we are out the starting blocks finally
Yeah,
now, and we just now need to start seeing it all in action.
yeah,
But overall, like obviously, I think it's a risk putting it on business, but it has to come from somewhere. We've still got one of the lowest corporation tax percentages in the G7 and within Europe, I think.
yeah,
Um, the capital gains increase was actually a lower rate increase than what Osborne did in 2010. So she still hasn't gone as far as like, so it's like she has really put the onus on. We're going to fill the fiscal
mm,
black hole with businesses, but hopefully the bigger businesses will bear the brunt of that. Um, but then everything else, I was like, thank God the investment taps are on. Like, I was just like,
yeah, no, same.
I always remember watching a Tory one and it was like, oh, 50 million for this or whatever, something for that. And I was like, what's that going to do? But
Yeah,
then all of a sudden you get 22.6 billion increase in day-to-day spending on the NHS. And I was like, not even like long-term rebuilding of hospitals. That was even more.
yeah.
I don't think the NHS just needs money thrown at it, but I do think it does right now.
Yeah, I do. I think there's an element of you can fix some of the problems by just giving people more money, and then there's an element of you need to fundamentally fix
mm.
the infrastructure around it. But you can't do either of those things without increasing money.
But they've got to deliver for people quite quickly again as well. Like they are calling it about a 10-year project, but I think throwing money at an NHS to get waiting lists down will hopefully people will start to feel that. Just before the election, tax bands will go up, so people will have more money, um, like take home money. Like other little nuggets, like tripling investment in breakfast clubs at schools doesn't cost a lot to do at all. It
Yeah,
costs pennies in the grand scheme of things, but like parents will feel that. Um,
yeah,
and I was just like, yeah, there are little things, there are like quick wins there that people
mm,
are gonna get. I tell you what, I am getting that pension triple lock, right? I don't hate
yeah,
it. I don't hate it as much now they've took the winter fuel allowance off. Let's just say because that was like two extra bits of money for pensioners. But that triple lock is increasing pensions by £470.
yeah.
So they are still getting a decent increase, even when you take away whatever the winter fuel payment
Yeah.
was.
And
And
I
like,
think the
I guess
winter
I was
fuel
just like,
payment, where I sit
it's
with the winter fuel payment cap is I think they've gone too low. So I
mm,
think it should have been a higher threshold. I think it should have been, if your pension is below 20 grand rather than below 12 or 11, whatever it was, I think it is too low. Um, but I think the other side of that is like, if I look at like somebody like, I always give the example of my grandma, right? My grandma retired at 55 years old on a head teacher's final salary pension. The woman cannot spend the money. She's been retired longer than she ever worked now. She can't spend a pension. She
yeah,
literally earns that much in her pension. Like up until this year, she's gone into a home this year. It's the first time she's ever been able to actually spend more than she brings in. Like it's just mad. Like the idea that she was getting winter fuel allowance, that she was getting a what do we call it covered, her license, TV license covered, etc., etc. Shouldn't need that covered. Nor do any of her mates either. Like, these things should be based on income.
mm, they
And
should.
the idea that pensioners should be untouchable is it's a really bitter pill to swallow when you look at the redistribution of wealth figures against what that generation had at our age versus what our generation has in terms of wealth, is, and where the wealth sits today. It's really, really difficult to swallow that idea that pensioners should be completely untouchable and not privy to changes based on income.
I know, because when you hear people, well, we found it hard, and I'm like, well, yeah, we also find it hard to buy a house, but they didn't, but they did have other hardships, but all of the data is there to say, right now in this version of the world, we have it. The younger generations have it a lot harder than they did, and yeah. But when I saw that triple lock, I thought, well, hopefully that might put this to bed now that they've kept
Yeah.
that in place, but then also took the winter fuel allowance away. Oh, another little nugget I did like was that increase in carers allowance, so you can earn more but still get your carers allowance. Because I just thought that's another
Right.
little thing where someone can still work up to 16 hours and then still get that full allowance. And I thought, yeah, that's another something tangible that people can feel quite quick. And
Yeah,
I think it's coming in
exactly.
quite quickly as well. I think that was like a 2025 measure. And something that did prick my ears up,
Mm-hmm.
the Skills England thing being set up.
Yeah,
It's just a
same.
small hint, but I was like, oh, that's interesting.
I thought the exact same.
Yeah. There were a few big omissions that I was a little bit sad about. No mention on reforming council tax.
Yeah.
But I
Yes,
don't
but
think that's too
interesting.
much to
Having said
do.
that, though, they did talk about devolution and talk about one of the first things she said was around devolution and working with the devolved governments in order to spread wealth. So I want to know more depth on what does that actually look like. And they have said that local council spending is going to go up, which is good because local council spending over the last 14 years has dropped by over 40%. So now most of that local council spending will go on, immediate stuff like health and social care, but that will also help the NHS to save money because the biggest problem that the NHS has got, one of the biggest problems that the NHS has got, is the problem with beds being kept for longer because health and social care has
Yeah.
declined so
Like
drastically in the
people
UK.
who should be in care but are in a
Yeah,
hospital because there's no. I know. Um, my only interesting thing is obviously a lot of this boils down to them talking about growth and how that's their big mission to
yeah.
grow. But then when they presented the growth forecast, I was like, that's not that great.
I know,
I
I
was
thought the same thing. I was like, can it not be higher? Are
I
we
was
not
like
in?
2% next year, 1.8% 2026, 1.5% 2025. I was like, that's still pretty anemic growth. But I think that is the growth figures off from what the budget in March, I think. I don't think they've taken into account all of these new policies because I think that would be really hard to do as well. I
I
don't
mean,
know.
they must have a rough idea of the return on investment that they're aiming to achieve from these.
There will, but I think it'll probably be more on individual. Like if they put a pot in for something, it'll be what do we get return on that, not necessarily just overall kind of GDP. Even though GDP,
Mm,
as we know, is not a perfect way to measure a
yeah,
country's success. But I was looking at the pre-briefing. It was like I think Germany was lower than us in the past 2 years, but it was the only one. Like France was a lot better growth. Japan was good, which I was quite intrigued in because I always think I hear stuff about the Japanese economy kind of dealing with the similar problems to us, but on steroids in the sense that they've got a really aging population and
very
all that kind of
interesting.
stuff.
Yeah, that's going to hit us in 2030.
Yeah. But then Canada and the US, I mean, the US is a completely different, like, I feel like we compare ourselves to them
Should
from
we
a
do
culture.
another one of these? Should we do another one of these this time next week?
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking that actually, I'm not sure if I can cope if it doesn't go the way I want it to. It'll just be me, like, going, "Oh, no," for about however long.
For a full 30 minutes.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
no,
might
me
not
going,
even be this time
"It's
next
the
week either
Handmaid's
because
Tale!" Like,
yeah,
oh, man, honestly.
it might take longer, um, because of a lot of the swing states are as close as they're saying that they will. They might need to do recounts and
I
oh, I
I
don't
am really I know, like, it's not what the polls are predicting. We're off on a tangent here, but I know
we
it's not what
are.
the polls are predicting, but I'm really hoping for a landslide victory for her. So, I think we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I feel like people are getting more of a dynamic of us working together. So, if any people watching this, and this is probably a preview if we do one for the US election result, but more about Kate is more of the positive person, and I am more of the
I'm a
I'm not
cup
sure.
half full cup half full kinda gal.
Yeah,
So
and I'm like not necessarily half empty, but like little spillages maybe.
yeah,
So yeah, and maybe we should do more of these on like when the next COP agreement comes out and all that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
absolutely. That could be
Yeah,
interesting.
but I
So,
think that's
well,
pretty
speaking of
much it.
we've covered quite a lot of stuff, and we're
Mm,
getting to a point where people will no longer be interested in listening to what we have to say, I think.
yeah.
So
What do you
what
mean?
we yeah. We're going to write a blog up on what this means for the green economy, what the effects of the budget announcements mean for the green economy, and what exciting things we've heard, what challenging things we've heard, what the impact of it all could be, and that will be shared on the website very shortly, and then. Yeah, we're also going to keep a close eye, and obviously, as always, we'll be inviting every politician that we can possibly think of to come and speak at Green Finance UK, Green Skills UK conferences that are happening in February next year, and of course, Regeneration Earth in June next year as well. So, but we'd love to get everybody else's thoughts on what has been the first budget of the new government. Do you think this is a good thing for the green economy? Do you think this will prosper growth? Do you think we're going to be hitting hard times again? Where do we feel we fit? I am optimistic and reserved in equal measure.
I think
That
that's
is,
a good way I think that's where I am. I'm optimistic. It's good to see a new vision for a country and a fresh vision. But I think she's taking some risks and we'll see. I will now be watching and listening to so much of the media absolutely probably tear into it and I'll be like, oh no, don't. I thought it was quite good. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see if people have lost their minds and don't understand what investment
you know
is and
what?
all that
I
stuff.
I think it will be a win if we get out the other side of this budget and the fucking economy's not crashed. That
Yeah.
would be a good win because that happened 2 years ago. Let's not forget. So I'm not
Oh,
forgiving people for
the bar is low then, isn't it?
the bar's in hell, babe. But
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, right.
so,
Hope everyone's
right,
enjoyed listening to it. Us
we'll
ramble.
find out. Exactly. Exactly. Right. Thanks, everybody. Speak soon.
Bye.
Bye.